you're a solopreneur, it doesn't really exist. You really can't build a business. You can build a job, but you can't build a business if you're trying to do it by yourself.
Welcome everyone to another edition of the Coach U Show. And today we have a very special guest, my good friend Beejel, who is the master of productivity. In the last 10 years, he has helped entrepreneurs be more productive, and he's had at 1,500 virtual assistants. If anybody knows how to be able to overcome procrastination and be able to overcome overwhelm, it's Beejel. Today, he's going to show us how he does it and how he helps all the other entrepreneurs do the same thing. Welcome, Beejel.
Thank you so much.
So glad you're here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
So how do people think about overcoming overwhelm? Because as an entrepreneur, we've got a lot of things we're trying to do at the same time.
The very first thing is we've got to become aware of how we're not showing up for our business. So even before we enter the conversation of productivity and outsourcing or even working with teams, we have to pull back the curtains on ourselves. Because really this starts with, what are we doing? How are we showing up in our business? Mm-hmm. And right now, people say, I'm overwhelmed, I don't have enough time, but we all have the same amount of time in the day.
Right.
But how is it some people achieve sending a spaceship up into the atmosphere with passengers for $250,000,
yeah,
and some of us are struggling to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
We've all got 24 hours in the day. So what it is that they've learned the art of productivity. They've learned the art of getting way more done than the average individual. So we're at a time right now where we have to really reevaluate this topic of productivity. It's not a sexy word. Here's the thing. Actually, in talking to entrepreneurs, they don't actually want to be productive. That's the irony of it. People don't want to be productive. What they want is the result. But we have to first step back and understand what is productivity, right, and the components of productivity. So that's really what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. So it's just a matter of getting more motivated and psyched up all the time?
Absolutely
Waking
not.
up an hour earlier every day?
Not really. I mean, that's part of it, but it's not where we start.
Right.
Where we start with becoming real with ourselves. I first found personal development, I think it was about 1992. So right out of college, and I was at a network marketing conference, and I first saw a motivational speaker on stage, and I thought, this is fantastic. And so I think while there's a lot of benefits to personal development, they skip over a lot of the details of what it really takes to run a business. Now, think about this. The reason we become entrepreneurs, right, is that we don't want to be managed, we don't want to be accountable, we want time freedom, we don't want to do performance reviews,
right,
blah, 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 right?
Right.
So we leave that world and we become entrepreneurs. Now, no one's managing us, we're not accountable, we don't do planning, we learn about goal setting, we learn about all the things and creating visions, but we don't actually do the work. So many of us don't actually do the simple things that we keep reading about, going to workshops about in our day-to-day operations. Why? Because there's no one to hold us accountable, right, to getting it done. So the first step is we've got to look at that part of who we are as entrepreneurs before we can even step into how do we become more productive, how do we become more efficient, how do we build a team. Is we got to go back to some foundational principles, I call them principles of productivity, and then layer in what we call the pearls or the boosters of productivity, which is what apps do we use, what tools do we use, and all that stuff. Because we can be busy and we can use all the technology and the software, but if we don't have the foundation, then we're just going to make ourselves busy and not actually produce the result that we're looking for.
Excellent. And notice Beejel's wearing yellow, his trademark yellow. He's got a yellow watch, he's got yellow shirts, and he has a bee costume, and he's the CEO of the Beeline program, and also Process Hive.
So I should explain that, because so right before my 50th birthday, I picked up, I don't know how I found it, I picked up a book. It's called Wisdom of the Bees. And it was actually a business management book that was based on the study of bees and beehives. And those principles were actually started to apply in running operations. So I run operations for 3 other companies. And so I started to actually integrate some of these concepts. And the more I got into this, I got fascinated by bees and beehives. I said, okay, I can take some of these principles that I'm using for running larger operations and start teaching them to entrepreneurs. So here's some fun stuff, okay?
Right.
So why the bee? Well, first of all, my name is Beejel, so that kind of works, right? But bees are they serve their individual purpose. Every bee has a function in the hive, right? So as entrepreneurs, we attempt to do too many different things, right? We play many different roles. But when super achievers have been interviewed, they have said that they're good at about half a dozen things. No more than 6 things, and most of them will just say one thing they're really good at. Entrepreneurs attempt to be good at everything, and hence why they create the overwhelm, right?
Right.
But bees have a singular function in the hive.
Right.
They know what they do, so they serve their purpose.
Right.
Bees also serve the hive, they serve the community, but bees also serve humanity. So I like to say that we entrepreneurs need to be more bee-like.
Yeah.
We serve our individual purpose, we serve the hive, which is the family of society, and we learn to serve humanity. So when we can do that, we're actually showing up in the right way as entrepreneurs. Not to mention that bees are very efficient. They complete what they start, and they defy science and logic. And sometimes I think entrepreneurs also defy science and logic.
But what if you're a solopreneur and you don't have a hive? You don't have armies that do different things like gathering food and fighting and building the hive and taking out the trash. What if it's just you as a single bee? What do you do?
Today we live in a global economy. We can go. There are dozens of platforms. We can go hire outsource your work to virtual assistants, specialists. So whatever skill you're lacking, whatever help you need, there is a range of platforms where you can go find the help you need. So that this idea of that you're a solopreneur, it doesn't really exist. You really can't build a business. You can build a job. You can build, and you make yourself really busy, but you can't build a business if you're trying to do it by yourself.
But most of our friends don't have virtual assistants yet. And they know that other friends do, and they see people like you with 500 virtual assistants. But what are some of the common mistakes, or what do they need to be thinking about to start scaling up their systems and teams?
So the first thing I would say is just don't try and outsource everything. Don't look at your entire what you do as an individual. Think of what is 1 or 2 things that you can delegate. Maybe it's just an hour per day, right? And a virtual assistant might cost you $5, $6, $7 an hour, right? But there's definitely something, and I've yet to come across an entrepreneur that couldn't outsource something, right? Maybe it's posting on social media. Maybe it's checking messages. Maybe it's checking emails. But so think in terms of a chunk of time or a chunk of work that somebody else could do for you, right? And start with that. What a lot of people do is they take their super long list of to-do things and they try and find one VA at $5 an hour and delegate it out and say, oh my God, it's not working. This VA, they couldn't do my social media, couldn't do my LinkedIn, they couldn't build my website, couldn't build my funnel. I said, wait a second, you tried to get one VA to run your business.
The super VA.
The super VA. It doesn't work like that, right? So you've got to chunk it down, and you can chunk it down to 1 or 2 things, get that off your plate. Now use that time to do something proactive in the business, and whether you spend that time getting more clients, so you can afford to bring another team member on. So you build your team systematically like that.
Now you mentioned something to me a few months ago around, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, that the most successful entrepreneurs, instead of focusing on the next project, they focus on the process. What do you mean by that?
So great question. So I always like to start with the processes that drive the business. Most entrepreneurs think in terms of projects. What website do I have to build? What funnel do I have to build? What book do I have to write? What course do I have to create? That's all great. These are projects. Now what I would say is projects cost you money, but it's the processes that make you money. So what's the work that comes after you spend all this time, effort, and money on the project, right? The projects, they feel good. Like, let's take an example. You go to a workshop. You feel good at the workshop, you meet all these people, you network, you collect all these business cards, you go home and you get busy. So you haven't turned the investment in the project into an asset. But if you had a system built, a follow-up system, say, or maybe you gave all these business cards, or took a photo of these business cards, sent it to your virtual assistant, and they did all the follow-up, set up calls for you with all these people, or you take your notes from the event, from the workshop, you've marked off the action items, you send that to your virtual assistant, they now go to your calendar and block off time for you to implement what you've learned, right? So those are the processes. Now what most people do is that they invest the time and the money in the projects, and they never get down to the processes. So what I always like to teach is say, think about the process first, and then decide the minimum number of projects you have to invest in to get the process to be functional.
Right.
And you can always spend a lot of money on projects, but if you get the process dialed in, figure out who in your business, whether it's you or your virtual assistant, is going to run that, and then you spend money frugally on the projects.
But what if I've never built a process before?
It's as similar as a checklist, right? So if you've done the work yourself, then next time you do that thing, simply write down the steps as you're doing it. It's that simple, right? If you something that you haven't done and you want to integrate it into your business, find a course or a program that teaches you how to do it. Go through it. Write down again the steps of the process, and that's the starting point. Now remember, there's a Japanese word called kaizen, which is there's no such thing as a perfect process, right? So you start with a best guess estimate of what the process is, and then you give it to you use it yourself, or you give it to your virtual assistant. They run it, and it's amazing how quickly your virtual assistant will improve the process and fill in the blanks. But always start with something versus, hey, I need you to do my social media. And I say that, but that's literally the instructions I've seen clients give their virtual assistant and say, hey, please do my social media. Now, you are a social media master. If I said that to you, even with all your years of experience, you would know what I wanted. Right. And you're a master at this, right?
Well, it's because we have things like this where we built a process. This doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
This happens from lots and lots of mistakes. We keep enhancing the process.
Exactly. Right?
And you do the same thing for your experience. What are repetitive things that you need to document so someone else can do it?
There's a book called, I believe it's Checklist Manifesto, right? Which is again, and another thing about productivity, when people mention books, it doesn't mean you have to go read every single book. You can probably get 80% of the wisdom of most books by going to YouTube and typing in the book name summary, or go to Blinkist, or go to summaries.com.
Or just read the Amazon reviews.
Yeah, just read Amazon reviews, right? So we can shortcut your learning by simply just adding some of these layers. These are what are called productivity pearls. And there's little tips and things we can do that can save us a lot of time.
So you and I have hired a lot of virtual assistants, and we know that people come in initially excited thinking, I can hire someone full-time for $300 a month, maybe in India, the Philippines, some other place. But you have a slightly different spin because you're looking at the value and what they're worth as opposed to what the hourly rate is. How do you mix that transition, and how does an entrepreneur view it the right way? Yeah.
So look, you can hire virtual assistants for, some of the ones I've hired have had previous jobs where they're getting paid as little as $1.50, right? Now,
an hour,
$1.50 per hour, right? Now, the minimum I allow a client to pay my virtual assistant is $5. So I overpay them. Why? Because we spend a lot of time matching the virtual assistant with the client's needs, right? So we don't look at, even though we use the word virtual assistant, that's just really on the public side because it's what we understand and use. But to me, it's a team member. And I approach it in the same way you might be looking at hiring any employee, which is it's about the value this team member can create in your business. But I also look at it from what is a decent livable wage for this person. Now, because right now, we're in a time, there's a lot of labor around the world, people will take what they get, right? And virtual assistants, doesn't matter what country you're hiring with, as long as they can smell that they think they can do the job, they're going to say yes. Right. Only for the client to discover that they actually don't have the right experience, and it doesn't work out. Right. So cheap is not the solution here. The solution is, are they providing the value that you need and able to do the task you want? And I call it parts, right? Yeah. Which is the processes, the activities, the responsibilities, and the tasks with the skills, or the parts of the business that you don't want to do.
That's an incredible acronym. So say parts again?
Yeah, so it's the processes, the activities, the responsibilities, the task, and the skills that you lack of your business that you need to help with.
Fantastic. And we like to think of our VAs on what that time is worth. And sometimes we will overpay because if we know a video editor can edit a video that's worth $10 in half an hour, that's technically worth $20 an hour.
Yeah. The other thing is when you look, if you overpay a VA by say $1, right? So on a week, that's going to cost you $40 more, right? So $40 to an entrepreneur in the West, it's not a big deal, right? We can absorb that cost, right?
Right.
But $40 extra to a virtual assistant is life changing.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you're willing to overpay even just a little bit, what you're going to get back is you're going to get loyalty,
Yeah.
and you're going to get someone who's going to stay with you way longer.
Yeah.
Versus they'll take the job because it came to them, but they've got their eye on where do I get the next pay increase.
Yeah.
And you might lose somebody good because you're just not willing to pay a little bit extra.
Yeah. Our friend John Jonas started onlinejobs.ph, where there's over 1 million Filipinos on this job site. And you'll see in other interviews when we talk about how do you hire the right VA, how do you train them, how do you pay them? And he says the number one thing to think about is not what the VA costs, but the loyalty. So you're not going to the Philippines because they're cheaper. You're going because if you hire that video editor, you hire that WordPress graphics designer, message responder, whatever, in the US, what are the odds they're going to still be with you in 6 or 12 months? And we have VAs that have been with us for years. So it's worth it for us to be able to invest because we know that they can continue to improve, continue to learn new skills, continue to train up other people. And so even though we might be paying some of them $8, $10 an hour, they're worth double or triple that because we've been able to invest in their career over the years. And in the Philippines and in India and other countries, they're not as freelancer oriented. They're more thinking about, they're by default, they're with you. So they're not out there looking for jobs all the time versus in Western countries, they're always looking. So I find that, and just like John Jonas said, you want to look for the value comes in the loyalty and how you build those, because an ongoing process doesn't mean people are leaving. It means these people, you've invested in them and you continue to extract value.
Yeah. You know, virtual assistants generally are not used to being paid on value. They're used to being squeezed on price, right? But in the moment you are willing to flip the script and say, look, you know, this is what I can afford today, but as you can add more value, here's what's possible. You'll be amazed what kind of talent you can attract, and that will stay with you as long as you're in business.
So Beejel, what advice do you have for our friends who are virtual assistants in the Philippines, India, maybe Nigeria, on how do they get skilled up and how do they deal with Western clients, right? What do they need to do to be able to make the kind of wage that we talked about? Alex talked about his VA that started out at, I want to say $300 a month and is now making making $6,000 a month. And we see a lot of stories. We have stories on our team. But if you're an aspiring VA, what can Beejel say to you to help you get on that path?
Darren Hardy, I can't remember if it's in a talk or in a book, says that super achievers will say that they're good at about half a dozen things, right? And so when I first get a resume from a virtual assistant, normally they list 20 plus things that they can do, right? Which to me makes them a generalist, which means that they're probably mediocre,
right?
Or at least that's my assumption. They're mediocre.
Right.
Now there may be some clients that will be attracted by that. Oh my God, I've got a virtual assistant that can do all these different things. But if you want to start to be paid the higher scale, it's identify the 1 to 6 things that you are good at, that you become great at, that maybe even world class at. And now you won't be valued at a low per hour wage, but you'll be valued at the value of that skill that you can provide.
Fantastic. And this is coming from someone who has over a decade of experience as an entrepreneur, helping other entrepreneurs be able to avoid these kinds of mistakes. Maybe so that people who don't know you, Beejel, you could talk about your experience helping other coaches and authors, your experience teaching and speaking and putting together courses so they can see just how amazing you are.
Right. So my story kind of goes back to 2009. I was a struggling entrepreneur, and had read the books, gone to the workshops, everything else, and I just wasn't achieving the success that I really, really wanted. And I had this kind of transformational year in 2009. At the end of that year, I ended up in the outsourcing. I didn't go really looking for it. I ended up in it. And so between 2009 and today, I believe I've had somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 one-on-one conversation with entrepreneurs. Right?
Wow.
And most of them came to me because they wanted outsourcing advice or how do I use my VA. But underlying that was really what they're asking for is how do I create better results in my business? So in that time period, I've been very fortunate to speak on stage around the world, have led high-end mastermind groups, coaching programs. As I said, I've kind of run operations for different businesses. And to me, it all comes back to the foundational principles, which is we are overwhelmed by knowledge and underwhelmed by implementation. So this is the time to start doing less. Not so much doing less. It is try not to do too many different things, and focus your efforts on one or two things that will create the result that you truly need in this time to move the needle in your business and in your life. Right, so that's that, and then delegate the morbid stuff. The morbid is another acronym, which is the mundane, the overwhelming, the repetitive, the boring, the I don't want to stuff, and the difficult stuff. When we outsource the morbid stuff, which is the stuff what I call, it's the stuff that brings us close to death in our own business. Right, that's when we're going to start producing better results, and that will leave us doing more of the stuff that we love doing, what we're good at doing, what we become great at doing, and maybe even world-class at doing. And then you're going to start seeing a shift in what you do.
Fantastic. Beejel, what else do people need to know? Entrepreneurs that want to aspire to build more processes and systems, create more value, avoid the morbid items. What are questions that I should have asked that I should ask?
So what are some of the foundational principles, right? So I always like to start with awareness of what's really happening, right? And I call them the productivity villains. So before we can start fixing things, we've got to become aware of what are we actually doing day to day that's hampering our results. And I always like to start with what I call understanding productivity, which is productivity is the word that's used right now in industry. All the gurus talk about productivity, but productivity in its true sense is basically the quantity of items produced. Then we have to layer in efficiency, which is the use of money, time, and effort in producing that number result. And then we layer in performances. How are we actually producing that result? Are we doing it stress-free? Are we doing it feeling overwhelmed? And then, so why do I compartmentalize? Because each of those can be approached differently. Then we look at what I call the productivity villains. Procrastination, right? Worry, regret. So anything that engages our brain in a non-productive thinking. Because when we have a amount of mental energy that we can put into our business, so anything that's draining that is actually making us unproductive. But we don't know that on a day-to-day basis. So the first thing I do is I do an audit of really what's going on first, and then we put in place, well, how do we deal with that in addition to producing better results? Because when we can address that stuff and we can get somebody into more focused, deep flow work in what they do and delegate the other stuff, they're going to start producing way better results. In fact, some of the people I've worked with, they produce better results in literally 2 or 3 days worth of work that they were just struggling to complete in a whole month before. And it's not science, it's not magic. Sorry, it's not magic. It's simply scientific, proven principles that people start need to following.
Amen. So tell us about the Beeline program.
The Beeline program is something I started experimenting with it in 2015, and it came. I was in LAX. I was actually flying from the US back to India. Just finished facilitating a high-end mastermind where folks were paying $20,000 plus to be part of this, and I had this moment of this irky feeling in my stomach, which is these folks are paying a lot of money to be in these masterminds, but they were actually not implementing what we were teaching them. We were creating $1 million, plans and strategies and stuff, and on paper it all looked great. But quarter after quarter, because we meet with them every 90 days, only about 10% were actually implementing what we're teaching, and which is like that's on them, right? But people are spending a lot of money on workshops, on masterminds, and these kind of things, and not producing a financial result. So I started asking myself, what's missing here? So the Beeline Productivity Program, to cut a long story short, started off with going back to some basic principles of what does it take to help somebody produce better results. And the realization was this, that if we can take the benefits of a corporate culture, accountability, weekly planning, monthly planning, daily accountability, performance reviews, strategic, visioning, goal setting,
Right.
someone to check in with, and layer that with the freedom of entrepreneurship. Now we have the best of both worlds, right? So the program basically combines that. It takes the foundational principles of goal setting, of proper planning, of looking at the processes that drive results, and combines that with allowing them to be individual entrepreneurs. And then we look at what they're doing that they can delegate out, and then help them find virtual assistants to work with them. That's what the program basically covers.
Incredible. So Beejel is the expert in implementing and increasing the productivity of folks like you and me. How do folks find out about you and reach out to you?
Yeah, they can go to beelineprogram.com, and that's BEElineprogram.com. And if you want specific information about working with virtual assistants, you can go to the Process Hive, theprocesshive.com, and learn more about what we do and how we do it and why we do it.
Beejel, so glad to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, buddy.
All right. That's the Coach U Show, where you're learning from experts step by step from their own experience.